Today was a wonderful day, June 24th, 2025, and we are discussing the main topics on today's news agenda. After the end of the war between Israel and Iran, the news agenda has calmed down a bit, and there are a few topics that are worth discussing. First, there has been a reaction to the results of the military operation that destroyed Iran's nuclear program. Mainstream media have published several articles criticizing the outcomes of this military operation. In addition, a NATO summit is taking place in Europe, with President Trump participating, which is also significant. And most importantly, the ceasefire is holding, and hostilities in the Middle East have stopped. Israel and Iran are no longer striking each other. Please don't forget to subscribe and like our videos. It really helps us promote our channel. We've just created this channel, and of course, we need your support. Thank you so much for your support. So, let's get started. Major media outlets have published articles by experts discussing the results achieved by the United States Armed Forces in bombing sites related to Iran's nuclear program. Experts aren't sure whether these results are satisfactory. Let's take a look at this article from the New York Times.
The American strikes on 3 nuclear facilities in Iran are likely to upend the country's thinking on whether to obtain a nuclear weapon. U.S. intelligence had assessed that Iran had not made the decision to build a nuclear weapon. The United States struck Fordo and 2 other nuclear sites at Natanz and Isfahan. The sad truth here is that by striking Iran, the U.S. has made it much more likely that Iran will want to obtain nuclear weapons, said Rosemary Kellenick.
It says that the results could have been better, and there's no certainty that nuclear production has been completely destroyed. It also mentions that Iran could resume the production of nuclear weapons and restart its nuclear program. And let's also take a look at this article from CNN.
The intention, one Israeli military official carefully spelled out to CNN, was to permanently remove the Islamic Republic's existential nuclear and ballistic missile threats. President Donald Trump insisted the strikes were a spectacular military success and that Iran's nuclear facilities had been totally obliterated. It's far from clear that ambitious objective has been achieved. Satellite images reveal extensive destruction.
This article also discusses how, apparently, the effectiveness of using American weapons was not sufficient and did not achieve the goals that were originally stated. Maybe there's a reason for that. At the same time, President Trump is posting angry messages. Let's take a look at President Trump's post.
Fake news, CNN, together with the failing New York Times, have teamed up in an attempt to demean one of the most successful military strikes in history. The nuclear sites in Iran are completely destroyed. Both the Times and CNN are getting slammed by the public.
President Trump claims that this is all fake news, that it's slander, and that the Iranian nuclear program was completely destroyed and cannot be restarted. Allow me to say a few words about the nuclear program. All we hear in the mainstream media is that Israel is bombing uranium enrichment centrifuges. However, as is well known, nuclear weapons are not made from uranium, but from plutonium. And we haven't heard anything about Israel or the United States destroying industrial facilities for plutonium production. And enriched uranium is generally used in energy production. Of course, it can be used in nuclear weapons, but it's definitely not the main component. In this regard, I'd like to point out that there is a plutonium production facility in Iran. This is the IR-40 reactor, which apparently was also hit. It seems that the dome of this reactor was damaged. Basically, there are 2 types of reactors used to produce plutonium. These are heavy water reactors and graphite reactors. As is well known, graphite reactors include the very first reactor in history, called the Chicago Pile, which was built under the stands of the Chicago Stadium and created in the mid-1940s by great American scientists as part of the Manhattan Project. And producing plutonium doesn't require any centrifuges. No underground facilities are needed. Notice that we haven't heard anything about any reactors that produce plutonium being destroyed. In addition, experts say that 400 kilograms of uranium-235 enriched to 60% were removed from Iran, and it was taken out, with the consent of the United States, to a third country. So, as it appears now, the deal was actually much deeper than it seemed to us at first. Can we say that this is a complete victory? Even though experts from mainstream media say no, I believe it is. Because even if not all of Iran's nuclear program facilities were completely destroyed, even destroying some of them sets Iran's nuclear program back by decades. So, of course, this is a complete success, and the fact that Israel and Iran have stopped bombing each other is also a complete success. Thus, the Trump administration has achieved the goals it set when it launched this military operation. Now, let's discuss what's happening in Europe. A NATO summit has begun in the Netherlands, and President Trump has arrived there. Let's take a look at what the media are saying about this.
President Donald Trump on Tuesday injected some uncertainty over whether the U.S. would abide by the mutual defense guarantees outlined in the NATO treaty. Depends on your definition, Trump told reporters, but the remarks from Trump previewed what could be another volatile appearance. Still, other NATO countries have become accustomed to the unpredictable when it comes to Trump.
Here's an article from the Associated Press that describes what's happening. Overall, the discussion is about how NATO countries need to increase their contributions to defense, because historically, NATO countries have hardly paid for their own defense and have considered it normal for the United States to always foot the bill. President Trump insists that defense spending for all NATO countries be raised to 5% of their GDP. But the European NATO member countries refuse to do this because they spend too much money on social welfare and government benefits. If they increase defense spending to 5%, they won't be able to feed their pensioners or provide assistance to those who need it. However, as has become clear during the war in Ukraine, the Russian threat has become very apparent, and European countries are afraid that Russia will launch an offensive. That's why, of course, defense spending needs to be increased. In addition, President Trump started a discussion about invoking Article 5 of the NATO Charter. This in itself is a very bad sign, because for many decades European countries were confident that Article 5 would be triggered automatically, that allies would join the war automatically. But it turns out that's not the case. The treaty doesn't guarantee that. The treaty only provides for the possibility of discussing such an option. So, dear friends, President Trump is trying to make European countries pay their fair share for defense. Not because President Trump is greedy, and not because American taxpayers are poor, but because the United States can't stand alone against this. The United States needs allies, not those who are always asking for something and need to be taken care of. That concludes our review. Thank you for watching. Subscribe and like. I'll see you tomorrow.